Alright, been a while since I did one of these. Had to think about this one very carefully for a while because it's an incredibly Picard-centric episode in the way that it is presented in the TV show. However, as I am going to get into later, actually using the idea of this is something that you could do from a gameplay perspective without actually directly tying it to one of your characters. Another interesting thing about this one is that it was Patrick Stewart's idea. No, seriously, of all the behind the scenes stuff about this, that's actually the only thing that's interesting. Other than the scrapped idea of a Ferengi using a thought maker to cause Picard to hallucinate about the life of his son. That was the only actual interesting thing in the scrapped ideas. Anyways, so moving on. We have the cast of this one. As usual, there is a random guy who is a crewman who we don't see very often, but he has actually been in several episodes. A recurring minor character, I guess you could say. And okay, more than I remembered. 84 and 2. Wow. Anyway, though. So, the main cast of this one, the primary guest character is Jason Vigo. The person that Picard thinks is his son. As it turns out, he's not, but an initial genetic test makes it look as though he is. Now, the exact specifics of how that particular thing came out was weird, but what Bok did was he basically just rewrote Jason Vigo's DNA in a highly unethical procedure, which normal people would not do because of the fact that the methodology that Bok used caused Vigo to develop a neurological disorder that was starting to cripple him. Anyway, though, so Vigo was the son of Miranda Vigo, who we don't see in the episode. We talk about her in because she's someone that Picard had known when he was younger, a lot younger apparently, because Jason is over 20 years old and he is somehow young enough to be Picard's son, which suggests that Picard is what, 50? Anyways, we don't really know a whole lot about Miranda Vigo other than Picard described her as fiercely independent and wasn't the kind of woman who would be like, oh, I got pregnant. I guess I have to get married now. Yeah, that's about the only thing Picard had to say about her as a person. Might explain why he didn't actually have a long-term relationship with her and just kind of like hooked up with her and then left. Anyways, they live in the Camor system, which is where Picard actually gets to rather easily because like he just looks her up in a Federation citizen database. The colony she lives on is actually something that is very easy to get to because, you know, it's just one of many, many Federation colonies. And the planet itself, we don't really see much of the planet. There's like one or two shots of parts of the planet surface, but not much of anything because this is kind of sort of a bottle episode as presented in the show. But if you were to do your own thing, you could have the players, you know, just like wander around Camor, talk to people on the planet instead of talking to everyone on board the ship. Realistically, the TV show did that for production budget reasons and not because it was good storytelling. Quite frankly, that's one of the gripes I had with TNG was the sheer number of things they did on board the ship that didn't really make sense. Anyways, though, one of the things that's notable about this, though, is that this is not actually a planet that is, shall we say, just in the Federation colony world, because it's a relatively, out in the boondocks colony world that a Ferengi is actually able to get to do crimes and then leave without actually getting arrested for it. So, there's that. But other than that, kind of sort of just another Federation colony. Another place that they go to is the Dorias cluster, which is a place that they have to find because of the fact that Daimon Bok is trying to make Picard work for it, because apparently it's not enough for Daimon Bok to kill Picard's son. He has to make Picard suffer first, because again, the whole plot is about making Picard suffer, not about actually like directly hurting Picard. Don't worry, that comes up later. So, the gimmick with this one, though, is that they have to figure out where a probe came from by looking at trace radiation that it had been exposed to, and then they eventually figure out that, oh wait, no, the Daimon Bok actually wanted us to find him. Yeah. Again, it's one of those super villain plots where the heroes aren't sure if the villain is actually trying to be found or hiding. Oh, hey, here's another thing that's interesting. It's like the Starfleet Academy shows that this is someplace that is not actually considered to be a part that's essential to Federation space, because again, it's on the border with Ferengi territory. Anyway, though, because this is where they actually confront Daimon Bok. Anyway, though, so now we get to Daimon Bok. So, the thing with Daimon Bok is that he is the father of a guy that Picard killed when he was a young officer, and Daimon Bok has spent decades being obsessed with revenge over the fact that his son was killed. Note, they never actually bother giving Daimon Bok's son a name. Not even in the second episode about this did they give him a name. Anyways, moving on from that. Bok's obsession was something that the other Ferengi did not consider to be conductive to being a good daimon, and that they felt that he was abusing his position for unprofitable ends, and decided to have him removed from his position as a daimon. Here's the thing. In the second episode with Bok, he's technically no longer a daimon. He's pretending to be a daimon. And the crew who is working for him were basically lied to about whether or not he was considered fit to be a captain. So them mutinying against him was kind of in following the Ferengi rules of being a captain. It was something he deserved. Oh, also is that Daimon Bok actually gets played by two different people, apparently, because they just couldn't get the same actor from the first episode. Whatever. Anyways, so other Ferengi in this episode. Okay, so we also have this guy named Birta. See, Daimon Bok isn't really a geneticist. So he had to get other people to help. This isn't one of them. This guy, however, is someone who is more or less a Ferengi bureaucrat. And someone that talks to Picard at one point about whether or not Bok is in fact actually a daimon. And also gives him information about his last known whereabouts. It's not really a whole lot of information, but it's more than Picard had prior to this, and combining that with the information that they had gathered earlier, they were in fact able to track down Bok. So, he was helpful after a fashion, but he was in fact actually helpful. So, this was one of the guys who was a major player in Daimon Bok's crew. I'm not sure if first officer is the right way to describe it, but he is someone who was there when it came time to kick Bok out of the captain's seat for a second time. And, he presumably took him back to Ferengi to be put back in prison. Speaking of prison, this episode actually talks about the consequences to a Ferengi captain for being considered unfit to be an officer, and explains what happened to Daimon Bok after the first time he did one of these schemes and got removed from command for it. Which, I have to say, it's a very interesting thing because of the fact that the show usually doesn't go this depth into Ferengi legal matters. See, because they go into cultural things a lot, but actually explaining how the Ferengi legal system does things, not as much. And here we have another interesting thing. This is a Ferengi code that, honestly, the use it has in the TV show is very similar to Morse code in real life. It's because, in real life, Morse code can be transmitted auditorily. That's the standard thing we use here, where something goes, yeah, that's an auditory version of Morse code. But Morse code can, in fact, also be done by flashing lights. And the way that Bizal works is very similar to that. The exact specifics of which were not actually explained in the episode. But it's the concept as presented. And last, we have the Subspace Transporter. This is something that is not actually confined to this episode. It's an idea that gets used more than once in Star Trek, but as something that is cutting-edge tech that most races can't make work because of the fact that it's just too hard to actually stabilize. Because Bok transporting onto the Enterprise can't do it unless the Enterprise is holding still. If the Enterprise was moving, he wouldn't be able to get a proper lock. Or I think that was the idea. Genuinely not sure exactly. Picard talks about how the Federation had done research into this, and that the Enterprise D computer actually has cliff notes from the Federation research, which the crew of the Enterprise uses to figure out how to reverse engineer the tech after seeing Daimon Bok use a functional one. Now, this is one of those things that is I'm genuinely surprised that this didn't come up more often in later works, because of the fact that a core aspect of this episode was the fact that, yes, actually, it does work. Now, this is something that gets used in the Kelvin timeline movies as a major plot point because they have someone use a subspace transporter to transport literally to Klingon space from Federation space, which is impressive, but he is teleporting to a planetary body that is a technically a moving object, but a moving object with a very, very easily predictable location. So, Now, this is another thing that's interesting is the whole idea that you need a different kind of shielding to block a subspace transporter than a regular transporter, which is part of why it's described as unstable because of the fact that the methodology by which a subspace transporter works is just fundamentally different like that, I guess. Anyway, though, it's a plot device that they explained it as taking a stupidly large amount of power compared to a regular transporter. That actually came up in Kelvin timeline, if I remember right, because like activating a subspace transporter, they couldn't hide it. It took too much power, and just like everyone saw it go up like a flare when you activated it. Anyway, though, in TNG, that is actually part of it too. It's because like it's something that Bok is able to do it because of the fact that he's been tinkering with it and experimenting with it. And this crew is like, wait a second. We thought that this was going to give us money somehow. You mean Bok has actually just lied to us about the fact he's going to pay us? What a heretic. To the brig. Yeah, that was basically what they did with Bok at the end of the episode. And they just like told the Ferengi version of Starfleet Command that, Bok lied to us about the goal of the mission. If he'd told us the truth, we wouldn't have gone along with it. We don't actually see what happens to them. They just kind of like talk about what they think might happen. Now, one thing that is notable here is that this is not the only time that this sort of thing comes up, and there's several different technologies that kind of sort of use this idea. So it's not necessarily using this technology in an episode. You could do a variation of the technology that has slightly different principles. Why exactly the Ferengi version of this use the same limitations that the Federation had been experimenting with is uncertain. Makes me wonder if the Ferengi somehow stole the Federation research data, because as I noted earlier, Picard had a copy of the data in the computer banks on the Enterprise D. You could state that while Bok had control of the Stargazer, wait, was it the Stargazer? Whatever that other ship was. That Bok had stolen information out of its computer banks. We don't know. Okay, the Kelvin timeline movies have something akin to this. I think it's technically not the same technology they have in Kelvin timeline, because it's not actually in this wiki article. I think it's anyway though. The Kelvin timeline makes it seem that the Federation had done experiments with this in the TOS era, which would mean that young Picard on whatever ship that was where he fought the Ferengi raider and at Tamaxia Zeta might have actually had a copy of the information in its computer data bank. And so it's possible that most Ferengi don't actually have this technology, and that, the Ferengi as a whole, stole the technology from the Federation. Now, the Ferengi equivalent of high command, would they have this after the crew of Daimon Bok's second ship that he got deposed from goes back to Ferenginar? Maybe. I don't think the Ferengi would make it a standard thing, though. But Ferengi like stealing things, and this seems like a great way to steal things. So that's a thing that you could have fun with in a story. Oh boy. Anyway, though, yeah. So going back to the basic idea, the whole genetic sequencing thing, and giving him the whole like genetic disorder and stuff. The thing with this is that a player character being told by a Ferengi all of this stuff, it doesn't need to be plausible. You could have a Ferengi just like do a transparent, bald-faced lie, simply to give the player a reason to investigate something, and then have people figure out 5 minutes later that you're 25 years old. You're not old enough to have a 25-year-old son. That sort of thing. Although, now that I think about it, one of the things that they had as a rejected plot idea was using artificial aging to create an actual descendant of Picard using a sample of Picard's DNA that wasn't actually a naturally born offspring of anyone. You could go with that, I suppose. Forgot to mention that earlier, I guess. Anyway, either way, though, you don't have to make it plausible if you do this to players. You can just make it an obvious trap and be like, okay, sure. We're going to go find this guy and figure out what his game is before getting rid of him. But this guy clearly needs to be gotten rid of if he's doing bullshit like these. Anyway, though, I think that's about enough about this one. It has potential as a plot hook. It really does. It's just one of those things where it's just like, this does not necessarily need to be played straight. And this is one of those episodes where I think that playing it straight would be a mistake because it's too heavily tied to Picard if you play it straight. Anyways, though, you guys have fun coming up with your own ideas. See you later.